All right, thank you. Again, this is the Redesigned Standard Grants Program. This is our virtual workshop. Thank you, Robert. Let's go ahead and introduce the team. Next slide, please. So this is the grants team. We're excited that you're joining us today. Let's start by introducing ourselves. I'm Amy Fonseca. I'm the Supervising Program Administrator for the Grants and Partnership Program, and I'll go ahead and hand it off to Michael.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Lee. I'm the Senior Management Analyst with our Grants and Partnerships team, and I will pass it over to Renee.
Hello, everyone. Renee Moreno. Welcome to our webinar and look forward to working with you. I'll hand it over to Robert.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Robert Marmito, Management Analyst, and I mainly work with mini grants. And I'm so excited that you're all here joining us tonight. And I'm passing it off to Clarissa.
Hey everybody, my name's Clarissa Sengling. I'm Acting Management Analyst on our grants team, and really grateful for you guys to join us tonight.
Yeah, we're looking forward to showing you all the new changes we have in the redesigned program. Next slide. If you're interested in downloading the presentation, we have the link there. You can scan it with your phone, or you can, the link will be in the chat, but feel free to use the guidelines to follow along. The corresponding pages to the sections are on the grant, are on this presentation, so you can follow along if you'd like. We also have many resources on our grants page, so also good to get that one and take a look. Next slide. All right, so we have quite a bit to go over. First, we'll start with a really brief introduction into Valley Water's mission, the Safe Clean Water Program. Next, we'll go over the Redesigned Standard Grants Program. We'll take a quick pause to do some Q&A, some questions and answers. After that, we'll hop on over to the next portion, which is maximizing your standard grant application. This will provide tips on creating your task, schedule, and budget for your application and grant proposal. And then we'll have questions and answer again at the end. Given that we have a lot to go through, we're asking that you hold the questions, but we will get to every question. If you want to go ahead and put them in the chat box so that, sorry, not the chat box, the question and answer box, so that we can track them and answer them. So we will take a break to do that, but want to make sure we get through all the content before then. Next slide. Okay, so just very briefly, those of you who are not familiar with us, we're the Santa Clara Valley Water District. Recently did a rebrand, and now we're at Valley Water. And we provide the community with safe, clean water for a healthy life, environment, and economy. So we do manage the region's waterways, and we are the lead protection flood agency. And do a lot of protection activities to create a healthy creeks and ecosystems. So this will be an important point. You'll hear it a couple times, but Valley Water's mission again, and the grant guidelines, you'll hear these three pillars multiple times: clean, reliable water, flood protection, and healthy creeks and ecosystem. So you'll hear that again. Next slide. So this program is funded through the Safe Clean Water and Natural Flood Protection Program. Back in 2020, voters approved Measure S, which provided $47 million annually for local projects that support safe, clean water, flood protection, and environmental stewardship. Next slide. Great. And so the Community Grants and Partnerships Program falls under Project F9 in the Safe Clean Water Program. And that is to provide grants and partnership for safe, clean water, again, flood protection and environmental stewardship. We have 4 funding opportunities. We have standard grants, which we'll focus on today. Those are competitive grants. We have our mini grant program, our water bottle filling stations, which we'll kind of touch on a little bit towards the end here, and then partnerships. And those are also our KPIs for the program. These are public dollars, and our goal is to ensure that the public benefits from them. So yeah, we'll get a little bit more into that as we proceed. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the different grants we have available and the different grant programs. So tonight we'll be talking about the standard grant. Again, when I say standard grant, I mean like our competitive grants, but we do have available mini grants. Those are smaller dollar amounts for shorter terms. And then water bottle refilling stations. And that is also available throughout the year. So for today, we'll focus on standard grants. The amounts available this year range from $10,000 and $1, so that's $1 above the mini grant, and then up to $150,000 per project. And this year we have 1.8 million available. Depending on the type of project and grant category you're going for, you'll have 3 to 5 years to complete your project. We are reimbursement based, so what that means is you'll have to pay for all of the costs up front and then submit a request for reimbursement. So I would keep that in mind if you are considering applying and plan for that. And the application period, it opened back in January and it closes March 28th, 2025. You'll see this date frequently. It is a very important date. That is the date that all the applications are due in the Flex system. Next slide. Okay, so for those of you who are returning, I know we have some newer folks and some returning grantees. We recently did a complete overhaul of our standard grants program, and we wanted to kind of share what's different in the new program. So right off the bat, we have 4 grant categories focused on the activity that the grantee will be doing. So this fiscal year, we are offering education, planning, and stewardship grants. And then next year, we'll alternate into the implementation grants. We'll get into those different grant opportunities a little bit later, but that's one of the big changes. Another change is we reduced significantly the grant requirements, which we'll get into a little bit later. We are now offering full funding, so we are no longer doing partial funding. So the grant request amount per project that you request, if you are awarded by the board of directors, you would get the full amount. Our insurance cost for the grant project is now an eligible cost. The application has been streamlined. The agreement process has been streamlined. And if you are awarded, you'll see once you start working with us that the invoicing and budgeting process has also been streamlined. So we're really looking forward to that. We want to thank all of our past grantees and stakeholders. A lot of effort went in on your part in sharing different things that you liked and that you didn't like about the program. So it's really built for you, and we are hoping that it is an easier experience. Next slide. Okay, again, this is a very important date. These online applications are due in the Flex system. Flex is our grants management system on March 28th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. So that's 11:59 at night. That is a Friday, March 28th is a Friday, but we are encouraging folks to register early to make sure that there are no issues and that we can get all of your organization information in there. If you don't have an account already or your organization isn't already registered, and to make sure that your application is all complete and ready to go, because if you're having any technical difficulties or you need assistance with something, we may not be available that Friday night. We'll do our best, but any glitches in the system or technical difficulties, we are not responsible for, unfortunately. The application review period will go from March to May, and then you'll hear back whether or not you are awarded that sometime in June. I'm not sure the exact date, but all of the applicants will be notified. And then depending on the complexity of your grant, we would be executing agreements between August and December 2025. So we can get into that in a bit, but let's keep going on to the next slide. All right, so who's eligible to apply? So this is just kind of a brief overview. Encourage you to go into the guidelines and see all of the fine detail. This information, as you can see, is in section 4.3, page 5. But cities, towns, county agencies, so public agencies are eligible. Nonprofit organizations with the 501c3 tax exempt status are eligible. Special districts, open districts, those are also government agencies, are eligible. Schools, community colleges, universities, colleges, learning institutions, public or not-for-profit, are eligible. If you're not sure if you fall within one of those categories, you are welcome to contact us, and we can kind of chat through that. But the project must be in Santa Clara County and provide benefit to Santa Clara County. That doesn't mean that the organization needs to be headquartered or located in Santa Clara County. It's just that the work needs to be done in Santa Clara County. If you're not one of these agencies, you can also work with a nonprofit or government agency as a sub consultant or as a partner, but the lead applicant and the organization signing the agreement has to be one of these eligible agencies and organizations. So if there's any questions about that, you can always meet with us and we can chat about it in the, we can also go over any of your questions in the question and answer portion of this presentation. Okay, next slide. Okay, so what types of projects are funded? So as you recall, we went back to those 3 pillars, the Safe Clean Water and Natural Flood Protection Program and a Valley Waters mission. So the project to be eligible has to have a strong tie with one or more of those pillars. It has to be related to clean, reliable water, flood protection, healthy creeks and ecosystems. So again, you'll want to keep these in mind as you develop your project and your scope. And we'll be going over each of the different grant types and some examples a little later in this presentation. But remember, again, has to be connected, and the stronger the connection, more likely you're going to score a little bit better. And just it has to be a project, so it can't be maintenance or operations. So again, a project has to have a start date and an end date, and it wouldn't be for ongoing, regular business. So keep that in mind as well. Next slide. So ineligible projects. Again, you'll want to see the standard guidelines for the exhaustive list, but just a quick little overview. Projects that are not eligible and activities that are not eligible are those that don't align with the Safe Clean Water priorities. Any kind of advocacy or political components, projects that are not accessible by the public. Again, these are public dollars, so we want to make sure that it is available for the projects. So for a lot of you government agencies, we wouldn't accept projects designed to meet regulatory or permit obligations. Land acquisition, so purchasing property or land is not an allowable cost. Proselytizing, so that would be recruiting for your religious organization or trying to get people to come to your religious affiliation. Any existing projects, operations or maintenance, mitigation projects, and then projects that are receiving resources from another Valley Water Grant Program or program at all. So if you have a contract with us through another program or another grant of ours, we wouldn't be able to fund the same project. So we wouldn't be able to do any double dipping. If you're not sure if you have a contract or some kind of agreement with us with another unit, you can always contact us, but that most likely would not be eligible. Next slide. Okay, So the application minimum requirements, again, this is all in the grant guidelines, so I won't go through every item, but it's pretty much the standard information. You'll need the online application, make sure you answer the questions thoroughly. You'll want to include your IRS W-9 tax form, audited financial statements. If you have issues with that, feel free to reach out and we can discuss your situation. We'll need a signed resolution, which we'll kind of get into a little bit later, but we need authorization for you to apply for the grant. Some kind of documentation or demonstrating that you have the accounting system that can manage the grant. So accounting software or whatever you're using, resumes of key staff. There's a project budget sheet, which is part of the application you'll need to upload. And then if you are using somebody else's property, you would need their permission or any lease agreements and then any permits. So every project is a little different. So the requirements will, for some of these, will be based on the project itself, but we can get into that a little later in the Q&A. And then if your question still, or you're not sure specific to your project or your situation, feel free to reach out to us, grants@valleywater.org. And you can also schedule an appointment with us on our website, valleywater.org/grants. Next slide. Okay, with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Michael.
All right, thanks, Amy. So now we're going to take a closer look at each grant category and provide an overview along with some examples. So the first one we're going to look at is education grants. Now, the goal of education grants is to support initiatives that promote curriculum development and community learning. So these grants will aim to raise awareness on safe, clean water, water conservation, flood preparedness, environmental stewardship, and more. Next slide, please. So for education grants, a bit of an overview. So these projects will typically involve activities such as presentations, curriculum development, classroom activities, videos, field trips, etc. Grant request range for this category is up to $150,000, and the agreement period will be 3 years of an agreement term. So we have been receiving some questions regarding the agreement term. This does not mean that you have to do a 3-year project. It just means that your project must be completed and closed out within the 3 years. And for education grants, there is no match requirement. Next slide. So here's one of our examples of an education type project that we funded in the past. This particular one was with Grassroots Ecology for their California Naturalist Watershed Education Project. And some of the grant activities included a summer internship program featuring environmental lessons, field trips to local natural areas within Santa Clara County, and hands-on educational opportunities. They did what's called like a bio blitz. So they had students go out and use an app and kind of research up on native species. Next slide, please. So next we'll dive into planning grants. And planning grants are designed to support projects that focus on planning or design activities for larger scale initiatives. Next slide, please. So activities under this grant are related to planning, design, environmental resource investigations, academic research, or any feasibility studies. The grant request range for this grant type is up to $150,000 with an agreement period of 3 years. And similar to education, there is no match requirement. And we don't quite have an example really quickly on planning grants because that is one of our newer categories. So, an example of something for a planning grant could be a project where, you guys have something in mind, but aren't really sure how it's going to be developed or the resources that are going to go into it necessarily. So you would like to have some grant funding to help pay for any, research studies, surveys, investigations that you would have in mind in order to kind of flesh out your project. So getting into stewardship grants. So these grants are designed to support projects that align with the Safe Clean Water Program priorities, and they can include a broad range of activities, as we'll get into in the next couple slides. Next slide. So for stewardship grants, eligible projects may include but are not limited to water conservation, pollution prevention, volunteer cleanup, and stewardship, small-scale wildlife habitat projects that are under 5 acres, and some other project types similar to those. The grant request range for this category is $150,000, but the agreement period is up to 5 years. And for stewardship grants, there is a match fund requirement of 15% of your total project cost. And we'll get into that in the next slide. So what are match funds? Match funds may include staff hours, cash or in-kind services, other non-Valley Water grants, or any partnerships with other organizations. So these can also include any donations that you may receive, and also any volunteer hours that you're contributing to the project. Project activities may not involve the following. So the use of on-site heavy machinery or construction equipment, release of runoff into waterways and or ground disturbances adjacent to or within sensitive habitat areas. Yeah, for more details about what is eligible and ineligible for this grant type, we encourage you to take a look at our grant guidelines. Next slide. So here's an example of a stewardship grant that we funded in previous fiscal years. This one's with Downtown Streets team for their Upper Penitencia Creek Cleanup Outreach and Revitalization Project. Grant activities for this project included recruiting unhoused individuals to be part of a litter abatement program, providing peer-to-peer outreach, and coordinating community cleanups and educational events within the area. Next slide. So the fourth grant type that we will be offering, but not this fiscal year, is implementation grants. So these will be offered in our next grant cycle. And these projects, some examples will include large-scale projects, wildlife restoration habitats that are greater than 5 acres, providing access for trails and open spaces, and other larger scale initiatives. More details on the application process, eligibility, and criteria for these grants is available in our upcoming grant cycle. And we encourage you to sign up for our mailing list and stay up to date with any announcements and information. Next slide. And with that, I will pass it over to Clarissa.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so now that we've went over the different grant categories, I'll be going over some of the requirements that apply to all of the grant categories. First one is insurance requirements. As Amy mentioned in the beginning, one of the changes in the redesign is that the insurance costs are now eligible expenses for your project. So you can and you should include these insurance costs in your application project budget. For insurance, it does need to be valid for the entire term of the agreement. And there are specific requirements, such as endorsements and clauses. So you can read about those requirements in our grant guidelines. And again, they do need to be valid for the entire term of the agreement. For your proof of insurance and other required documents, they do not need to be submitted with your grant application, but they are required before the agreement execution. So you do have some time to get your documents together, and staff will be, letting you know which coverages are required for your project. Next slide. Okay, so in addition to insurance coverage, we also have requirements regarding environmental compliance and permitting. Because Valley Water is a public agency, we are required to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA. So CEQA requires Valley Water to analyze the project's potential environmental impact. And we do have our own internal environmental planning unit that handles these CEQA reviews. So as an applicant, you don't need to have your review completed at the time of application. But like insurance, it does need to be completed by the agreement execution. Throughout the review process, our environmental planners may have questions regarding your project. So the grant staff will can help relay and they'll help with communications. But the review is solely done by our planners. It's not the grant staff. So just keep that in mind. We'll be your main point of contact, but we are not the reviewers for CEQA. Okay, next slide, please. A little more information about environmental compliance. We did try to streamline the process for education and planning grants. So they are still required to do the CEQA review, but hopefully it'll be a little bit more efficient this time around. For stewardship, it does require a little closer look. But we are awarding higher points the further you are along in the process. So it could improve your application's score. Next slide. Some other things that are important to note, and you should keep these in mind as you prepare your grant proposals. If you are selected for funding, you have 3 to 5 years to complete your project, and that's starting from the agreement execution date or from the date when the agreement's fully signed. Okay, and again, the standard grants are reimbursement based, so just keep that in mind as you're making your project. And just to reiterate what Amy was saying, the public access and benefit must be in Santa Clara County. So the residents of Santa Clara County must be able to access your project or benefit from your project. Please remember, you won't be reimbursed for any work that's done before the agreement is effective. So just don't start your work until after we've signed the agreement. And lastly, you can contact the grant staff for any questions. Okay, next slide, please. We're getting close to our Q&As. Just a few more things to point out. We've been referencing the standard grant guidelines throughout our presentation, so we really do recommend you read that thoroughly. And you can visit our website and register on Flux, and you can view the application. Even if you feel you're not ready yet, you can at least take a look and read what will be required. And we do have our resource page there. You can see our frequently asked questions, which we will be updating depending on the questions asked tonight. And it'll have our timeline, our guidelines, and lots of very informative resources on that page. And if you go to the next slide, there's the URL for you, valleywater.org/grant-resources. And if that's still not enough, you can scan the QR code and you can schedule a meeting with grant staff, and that will be through Zoom. So it'll be a virtual meeting. So that is also available for you as well. And next slide. So we touched on this a little in the beginning. We do have our other grant opportunities. One is our mini grant programs, and they are up to $10,000 per project. And the other is our refill station grant programs, which is up to $5,000, and that's to purchase, install, and maintain a water refill station. So we do have the links in the chat that will give you more information about these grant opportunities, so you can take a look at that as well if you're interested. And next slide. Another thing we'd like to tell you all about is our upcoming National River Cleanup Day, and that will be on Saturday, May 17th. And we're recruiting individuals or businesses or organizations to host creek cleanups throughout their community. This is a national event, so you'll be doing your cleanup along with folks from all over the country. And we'll provide the supplies. We just need to provide the people. And you can find more information about that through cleanacreek.org, and the link is in the chat as well. And next slide. Okay, we reached our Q&A portion. I will pass it on to Amy.
Yeah, thanks, Clarissa and team. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and take a few minutes to answer any questions you have so far, and then we'll have another Q&A at the end. So the first question is from David. If our agency has a grant with Valley Water, but this application would be for a different project or program, would we be able to apply? Yes, as long as it's clear that it's a different project with different deliverables, should be fine. You would probably be eligible to apply. Okay, next question from an anonymous. San Martin is on wells and looking at education on well maintenance for seniors. Also to educate how a well should be maintained and what can and cannot go into the groundwater. We would do this in town halls and schools and house visits to these seniors who are interested in as well in the maintenance. And then they had a couple follow-ups. Does this sound like a project that would qualify? And then nextly, they also included that we are also on septic systems. Okay, yeah, because you're out in San Martin. Yeah, so from first glance, that may be eligible. Michael, I don't know if it would be it really depends on what kind of activities you're doing. If you're going out to the wells and testing, it may actually fall under stewardship. But if it's just classroom and you're providing information and like a demonstration in a classroom or virtual setting, that would be educational. So it kind of depends on your project. And I actually would recommend that you schedule a meeting with us. We have that link that was provided in the chat, but I don't know if Michael has anything he'd like to add on the wells.
Yeah, I would just echo what you said, Amy. If it's educational, if it's simply just developing educational materials to help inform the elderly, then it sounds like it would fit under education grants. But if you're going to be doing, as Amy had mentioned, any testing or any sampling or any other type of physical activity involving the wells, then most likely it'd probably be something like a stewardship project.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, good questions. Okay, next one we have from Liliana. How much of the target total budget is being allocated to each category respectively? So we do have that 1.87 million, and it's not allocated to any particular category. So each project will be scored based on what's in the grant guidelines. And then the projects that have the top score will be recommended for funding. So it could be any kind of mix and match, but there is no limit on like education versus stewardship. It's all based on the project itself, whether or not it will get funded. Next question is from Vicky. We're a small nonprofit and are not required to have an audit. Is that okay if we submit our adopted budget? Probably. If you want to connect with us, send us an email. Yeah, if you're a small nonprofit, a lot of times they don't have audited financials. So I would just check in with the team on your situation and we can discuss that. Okay, from Liliana. When you mentioned not being able to fund a project that is already being funded, do you mean by Valley Water or can the proposed project not be funded at all? I mean by Valley Water. It has to be kind of a new project, but if you're getting other like funds from other sources, like other grants or other partners, or you're using your own funds, that would be fine. Hopefully that answers your question. You can always unmute too to clarify. So feel free to raise your hand on that one. Will you be releasing the scoring guides? Yeah, of course. They're in the grant guidelines. So everything, the whole way the panelists will be scoring, will be using the guidelines. So everything is right there and transparent. So yes, that is in the guidelines. And so take a look. Okay, next question from Anonymous. I think you mentioned the education grants may be subject to CEQA review. Does that include projects that are mostly classroom and field trip oriented? So I'm going to go ahead and let Michael answer that one, but good question.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So, yeah, our environmental planning unit does they are required to review even education grants for CEQA. However, that's why in our program we require that there is no physical activity or physical work associated with education grants, so that when they do get to the planner, there is a very high likelihood that CEQA does not apply to education projects. Obviously, it'll be a case-by-case basis, um, but as long as you are not involving physical work and you're meeting the eligibility requirements in our program and our guidelines, um, you shouldn't run into an issue with any CEQA.
Yeah, and we can assist with that, but yeah. Okay, I don't see any more questions, but if you have any, stick around. We'll have another Q&A session kind of towards the end, so we can go ahead and go on to the next portion of the workshop. Thank you all for your questions. They were really good ones, and hopefully we answered them, but feel free to follow up if you saw you weren't clear on our answers. So I will go ahead and pass it off to Robert.
Great, thanks, Amy. All right, so as we move into the second half of tonight's presentation, we will focus more on tips on maximizing your standard grant application, including how to create a strong project scope, schedule, and budget. First, it's important to note that the application process has been streamlined, so it's been designed in a way to make the transition into the grant agreement smoother if you are awarded funding. So for returning applicants and grantees, you may remember how previously we had to repurpose your application into an agreement, which often included a lot of administrative work on both sides. And so with the new redesigned program, we're hoping that this new process will ease that burden and make the agreement execution process a lot more efficient. Another thing to keep in mind is that anything you include in your application, whether it's in your project scope, schedule, or budget, those are the things that will be carried over into the grant agreement, and that will be kind of the guiding framework for your entire project. So those are the type of things that you will be, that will be holding you to as your commitments in the contract if you are awarded for funding. So in short, we just like to encourage applicants to treat your application as a contract in the making, because the details that you submit will guide the way your contract is written and what you're required to complete. Next slide, please. All right, so first step is just getting started with your application, is registering on the Flex system. So as mentioned, we recommend that you do that in advance, because it does take a couple of days for staff to go in there and process your registration. So when registering, you will create your own individual profile, which will then be connected to a shared organization card where members of the same organization can collaborate, view applications, and submit documents. However, there's only one person can be editing the application at any given time. So we encourage you to just coordinate on ways on who is going to be filling out the application if there are multiple people accessing that online. Next, we do encourage you to identify who the authorized signatory is. And this is the person who is responsible for signing the grant agreement. We do require some documentation of who that authority is, and that usually comes in the form of a signed resolution from your organization's governing entity. And so this is a requirement to be submitted at the time of application. And in our grant guidelines, we actually do have a sample resolution that contains, the language that we're kind of looking for. If you wish to reference that or use that template, if you need to, draft one up and then bring that to your board. If you have any questions about the authority documentation, we do have a resource guide available on our grant resource webpage. We also recommend that you work on that resolution sooner rather than later, as we understand that may take some time to get that approved. And then just one more thing too, the authorized signatory does not need to be the one to submit the application. We just require you to identify who they will be at the time, the agreement is getting signed and the invoices are being made. Next slide, please. All right, so before we dive into the overview of the scope, budget, and schedule, we would like to just share some quick best practices to keep in mind when filling out your application. So first, we recommend reading the guidelines to determine which grant category is the best fit for your project. And then on the application itself, we do encourage you to read each question thoroughly. You'll notice if you go into Flux, there are different color-coded texts. So the red ones usually indicate anything that is required. And so we have some red text on there to indicate what documents you need to require along with the application and other important information that we need. Purple text on the application are you just help text. They're there to kind of guide you and help you as you fill out the questions on the application. And the blue text are indicate optional uploads. So these are not mandatory to upload at the time you submit your application, but they can help provide more information. Another best practice that we like to tell our applicants is to be as specific and detailed as you can. Again, what you write in your application will be the guiding basis for what is in your agreement. And so we encourage you to just include as much information as you can. But also, we also just encourage you to hit save as regularly as you work through the online application so you don't lose your progress. Or if you would like to work offline, another great way is to copy like the questions on Flux into like a Word document or a Google document, type your answers out, and then copy and paste your answers into the text boxes if you find it easier that way. Lastly, we just want to make sure that your project clearly ties into the mission and program priorities. So as you fill out the questions and as you think of the scope of your project, it's really important to have that strong connection and tie into our agency's mission and the program's priorities. Next slide, please.
Just real quick, sorry to interrupt, Robert. We did get a quick question, so let's go ahead and answer it from Vanessa. She says, can we see the application before we register? Yeah, so the application again is in the guidelines. So yeah, take a look at that. That has all of the questions, but we will use Flux. It's the official application, so you'll go off of that and you need to submit through Flux. We won't accept through email or any other means. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Amy. All right, so yeah, speaking of the application, this is just kind of the overview of what's going to be found on the application. So you'll kind of see how it's broken down. So in the first section, we have questions pertaining to your organization. And this is where we ask you to upload like the resolution, your W-9, any audited financials and things like that. And then the next part of the application starts talking more about like the project itself. So that's where you're going to find questions like the project summary, where your project site location is going to be held at, whether it's online, a physical site, or a mix of both. We're going to ask you, to provide more details about that, as well as the property permissions, letters. And then we also have a question about benefits. So this is just, questions about how does your project tie back into our mission? How does it support our goals? And what type of community is going to be benefited or served with your project. Next is the scope. So this is where you're going to be writing all your actions, your deliverables, schedule, and then any additional information regarding long-term maintenance and management for your project. After that is the project budget. So this is actually submitted as an attachment to the online application, but the link for that attachment is embedded into the application itself. So when you go into Flex and you reach the project budget section, we do have a link there, which you will see later on in the slides, where you can download the Excel sheet for your budget. And then, once you fill that out, then you upload it back into Flex and then submit your application. And then lastly, we have another section just talking about project readiness. So this is just any additional information that kind of shows how ready you are with your project, and the kind of staff that will be working on that. So these include documents like key staff resumes, financial statements, and any permitting documents that you might have at the time. Next slide, please. All right, so now we would like to go into the overview of the scope, schedule, and budget. So these are kind of the bulk of your application. This is where a lot of the information is going to be read and evaluated by panelists. So this is where you could really put in a lot of the details that we ask you to put in there. So for the scope outlines 3 important things about your project. It highlights the project's purpose. It identifies key tasks, and it lists out the key deliverables and impacts of your project. The schedule outlines the milestones and deadlines for each task of your project, from the start date to the final deliverables. And then the budget is the summary of the major expense categories and funding sources by task, and it includes monetary and in-kind contributions. And we'll be going more in depth about what the budget is and how it looks like later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. All right, so for the scope, if you go into the application, you'll notice that the scope is divided into 4 tasks. So we call these tasks. So you have your first task is planning and design, and this task involves laying out the groundwork for a project, including retrieving any type of permits, conducting any research, gathering insurance, holding any type of meetings. So anything that falls under planning and design for your specific project, those are the type of things that you would put under task 1. The next task is outreach and community participation. So this task focuses on engaging with stakeholders, building community support, and encouraging participation. So things that could fall under that task could be stuff like promotional materials, making flyers, promoting it through social media, and describing how your methodology kind of supports the actions within the tasks. And then the third task is implementation. So this involves the work that will happen to complete your project, such as carrying out the activities that or deliverables that you've found from task 1 and task 2, and putting them into action. And then lastly, we have the evaluation and closeout. So this is where you kind of assess the outcomes of your project. How are you going to measure success, and what type of deliverables are you going to have to show that? And so a lot of the stuff that we've seen commonly includes things like surveys, data, and then of course the final project fact sheet, which is required at the time you submit your final invoice. And we do have templates for that as well. So those will kind of come in as the time gets closer. But that's just something to think about when writing out your scope. Next slide, please. All right, so as mentioned, you will be required to outline what specific actions that you will take to complete each task. So you'll see that within each task, you will be asked to write out the actions and deliverables. So in the actions, these are more kind of like the specific steps that you will take to complete the tasks. And we really ask you to be as detailed as you can, include any type of methodology that you'll use, any references that you could cite, or supporting evidence, or best practices. We do encourage you to write them down as applicable to your project, essentially just detailing what you will do and how you will do it. In addition to laying out the actions for each task, you will be asked to list out the deliverables. And so these things are the tangible outcomes or outputs that demonstrate your progress and success. So you will need to clearly define those deliverables for each of the 4 tasks in your application. And then just again, keep in mind that whatever deliverable you put in your application, those are the things that we're going to be looking for when you complete your project, if you're awarded for funding. And those are the type of things that will also be in your agreement. So that's just something to think about. So when you're writing your deliverables, we do encourage you to make them clear measurable, specific, as well as realistic. Next slide, please. All right, so for the next few slides, we kind of have some examples of how actions and deliverables would look like for each type of grant category. And I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but I'm kind of just going to skim over some of the main parts of what it would look like depending on what grant category you apply for. So for the first example we have is education grants. So under task 1, the application, you're going to be required to write down your actions and deliverables. So an example of an action that you would take for planning and design for an education grant would be developing educational curriculum or classroom workshops centered around environmental stewardship. And then the deliverable for that action under that task would be a copy of the educational materials and lesson plans. And then for implementation, an example for the action would be, staff will host the educational workshops into classrooms of Title I schools, followed by a field trip to a habitat preserve. And then your deliverables would be, photos of the event, attendance records, any type of journals that they're required to do, things like that. Next slide, please. And then kind of the same idea for a planning grant. So if you apply for a planning grant category, these are just some examples of what would go in through for each task. And just FYI, these are very general, very high level examples. And the actual application itself, we will require you to include a lot more detail than this. But just for examples purposes, we do just have these as very simple as we can. So for planning design task, for planning grants, an action could be something like designing a project and coordinating the development of a feasibility study. And then the deliverables would include something like design drawings, project timeline, or a list of anticipated reports and studies. And then for outreach and community participation, an example of an action for that task would be describing how your project will outreach to the community. And so that could include things like, for the deliverables, it would be like your outreach plan, any copies of your flyers, links to any social media posts, and things like that. Next slide, please. All right, and then lastly, we do have examples broken down for a stewardship grant. So for task 1 for a stewardship grant, an action item could be design project elements. And then the deliverable would be the design plan and drawings, a pre-development site photos, a native plant list, and things like that. And then for implementation for a stewardship grant, an action could be staff and volunteers going out to build and raise the garden beds and prepare soil planting for 30 species of native plants. And then deliverables would be photos of that, the plant propagation data, and attendance records for staff and volunteers. So again, those are just kind of just general examples of what could go into each task, depending on what kind of grant that you have. And we just kind of do this, the purpose just showing of what an action looks like and what deliverable looks like. So deliverables, again, must be clear, realistic, and specific, because those are the things that we're going to be looking for when you submit invoices for reimbursement. All right, next slide, please. All right, so schedule. So the schedule is another key part of your application, as it kind of shows you how you plan to complete your project. And so in the application itself, you'll see that your schedule is kind of broken down to your tasks. So we ask you to kind of list a start and end date for each task. So planning and design, when do you think you're going to be starting that? And when do you think you'll be done with all of the actions under that tasks? And when the deliverables will be completed. And so that's just kind of like a general thing, kind of just reflecting the overall scope of the project, just showing that you have a clear start and end date for the entire project. We do just want to keep a brief note that agreement start dates may vary. So again, looking back on that timeline or that table with the deadlines, most agreements, depending on the complexity of the scope, they may have a start date of August, while others might have start date around December of 2025. So we just want to keep that in mind as you plan your project, that some of the dates may vary, but it's just good to kind of have a general sense of how you plan to complete your project and when. And just a reminder for planning and education grants, you have a time frame of 3 years to complete all of your tasks and deliverables, while for stewardship grants, you have 5 years. Next slide, please. All right, and then I'll pass it over to Michael to take us through the budget.
All right, thanks, Robert. We're kind of in the home stretch here. So, yeah, regarding budget, you will be required to upload the budget as an attachment using a budget spreadsheet template that is included in the application. So when you guys log on to Flux, open up the application and get to the budget section, you'll see there's a link. And that link will open up the template for you, and then you can fill out the spreadsheet from there. So just a reminder from previous, you will be required to include matching funds for stewardship grants. So 15% match funding requirement of the total project cost. And to reiterate, your projects must not include other Valley Water resources such as grants, other Valley Water grants, volunteer programs, contracts, etc. And in-kind volunteer hours, staff hours, monetary or in-kind contributions. Those are all other funding sources that you will be required to list in your budget spreadsheet if they apply to your project. Next slide, please. So this is a list of some ineligible costs, but I highly encourage you all to take a look at the guidelines to get all the details for what's ineligible for your budget. But some of the things to list off are pre-award expenses. So what we mean by that is any pre-execution of your agreement expenses. So if you accrue any costs prior to your agreement getting executed with us, those costs you cannot request for reimbursement because they came before you had an official executed agreement with us. Land acquisitions are also ineligible. As I mentioned before, work being supported by other Valley Water funds or programs. And any indirect project costs, such as, but not limited to, organizational operational costs, such as office rent, utilities, equipment, taxes, etc. Any construction equipment purchasing, or any professional development. Next slide, please. So this is just a screenshot of what you'll see in the application for the budget. You'll see that there will be a download link there. And then once you've finished filling out your budget spreadsheet, you can then click the green plus button there to upload it into your application. And at this time, we're going to go through a very quick little workshop of our budget spreadsheet, just so that we can kind of show you all the ins and outs of it and give you some helpful information. Okay, so thank you. Okay, so this is what the budget spreadsheet is going to look like when you download it. We filled it in with some example line items just to kind of help you guys visualize what it's going to look like. Some of the key improvements that we've made to this spreadsheet for any previous or existing grantees that we have on the call are we've improved and simplified the layout, and we've separated the costs into 3 main sections rather than keeping them combined into one table to improve legibility of the spreadsheet. One important thing to note about personnel labor and supplies and services, those are strictly for the grant funding requests. So whatever you put in there, that is associated with what you're requesting from the grant funds. While other funding sources which is a little bit further down, um, that is for grantee or partner contributions or other grant funding that you've received or any in-kind donations. So that's basically what you or your project partners are putting forth towards the project. One important thing to note for other funding sources is we are allowing you to lump sum those amounts. So you don't have to break them out by task. So that's one way we've tried to make it easier for grantees. And just in case you need any other information or help, Amy, if you can scroll to the right and the top right. We do include a term definitions and instructions kind of helpful text there. So it gives you a definition of all the terms that are used in this spreadsheet, as well as some instructions on how to fill it out. Yeah, so can we jump to personal labor section real quick? So this section, this is where you're going to list out all of your organization personnel costs. So you can see some examples we have there as executive director, project manager, admin assistant. And the subtotal column on the right, that's going to be the subtotal of that particular line item. And you are required to basically break out that subtotal between the 4 standardized tasks of the project. And that'll be based on, what work they're doing for each task. And then you can estimate how much it'll cost per task. One of the important key updates that we've done is we're now using a loaded hourly rate. So in the past, we had a standardized 20% benefits rate with a 10% overhead. And we got a lot of feedback from existing grantees saying that, for some organizations, 20% benefits rate was not enough. So we're now leaving that benefits rate up to you guys to determine what that's going to be. And all that we ask is that in the notes section, you list out the actual formula for how you came up with that loaded hourly rate. So in the example, you can see for executive director, let's say it was $75 an hour multiplied by whatever your benefits rate that you want to set is, and that's how you came up with the rate. And at some point, we will, if your grant is awarded, we will vet your how you came up with your calculations based on any audited financials or pay stubs. Can we scroll down to supplies and services? So supplies and services is going to be where you list out your materials costs, contractor or consultant fees, and also where you can list out the insurance. So again, this section is for what you're requesting for reimbursement from the grant, and that's why you have to break it out by task. Specifically for insurance, you'll see in the instructions, there's some help text there, but for education and planning grants, the maximum amount you can be reimbursed for insurance is up to $3,000 for the entirety of the project. And for stewardship grants, it'll be up to $5,000. And if you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to us or schedule a call to discuss. Okay, and then let's move down to the last section, other funding sources. So again, this is where you'll list out costs that you or your partner orgs will be paying for towards the project. You can also list out any additional grant funding that you may have received on the project, and any in-kind donations such as volunteer hours, materials that were donated, etc. And again, you don't have to divide out by task because this is what you are contributing to the project. So hopefully that makes it a little bit easier when you're filling out this spreadsheet. And an important note for stewardships for that 15% match, these other funding sources are what are going to make up that 15% match of your total project cost. So as long as the subtotal of other funding sources is at least 15% of the total project cost, you'll meet that requirement. Okay, can we jump back to the PowerPoint now? Okay, and with that, I will pass it over to Amy.
Great, thanks, Michael. So just to summarize again, the documents needed to be uploaded along with your application are listed in the grant guidelines. Again, those are kind of your standard forms like the W-9 from the IRS, your organizational budget, that signed resolution we discussed earlier today, and those items. Next slide. So once you submit your application through Flux, you should receive a confirmation email. So you'll want to double check. If you don't receive it within, 2 to 3 minutes, take a look in your spam. And if you're still not seeing it, feel free to reach out to us, grants@valleywater.org, just to make sure that it went through. So we want to make sure that you get that in well before the deadline, just in case there are any kind of technical errors or you need assistance kind of last minute. We want to make sure that we are able to help you. Next slide. All right, so before we go into questions, I wanted to just do a quick summary. If you go to the next slide, please, Renee. Again, this is the application timeline. Again, that important date is March 28th. That's a Friday, 11:59. So that's at night, right before midnight. Those are due. Our panelists will review the applications between March and May. And then in June sometime, we will present the proposals and recommended grants to the Valley Water Board. That is a public meeting. We will let all of the applicants know when that happens. So we will share that information when it's available. In July, we'll do the official award notice. And then depending on the complexity of your grant, we would be executing the agreement sometime between August and December. So most likely the educational grants will probably go a little quicker, but the more complex stewardship grants may take more time. So you'll want to account for that in your planning and getting all your resources together. So next slide. As mentioned, we are available. You can give us a call. We have, during regular business hours, always somebody assigned to the hotline. That's the phone number there. You can always email us, grants@valleywater.org. And then our website there, as Clarissa mentioned earlier, there's a lot of really great resources on there. So valleywater.org/grants, and you'll see the link. And then you're always welcome to schedule a meeting with us if you want to discuss your particular project or situation, or you need assistance. You can go ahead and schedule that through Calendly, and that'll sign you up. Next slide. And we do have the workshop feedback survey, so please feel free to fill that out. You can scan it, you can click the link. We'll go into questions now, but if you are able, please take that survey. That helps us improve our workshops and improve our programs. So we do appreciate you hanging out with us this evening, and we'll stick around as long as there's questions. So I did see 2 come in, so I'll go ahead and get started on those. The first one is from Anonymous. Can an agency apply for more than one project? Yes, so you could apply for more than one grant. They have to each be for a separate project, but yes, you could apply for multiple projects. Do the permits have to be, another question from Anonymous, do permits have to be awarded by the application deadline or by the execution of the agreement? I'm gonna let Michael answer that one.
Yeah, so in general, most permits can be pending at the time of the application, because we do understand that permitting processes can take a long time. But what we do ask is that if your project does require any types of permits, that you at least provide some documentation showing some good faith that you're in the process of obtaining those permits. So yeah, whether that be like encroachment permits or environmental permits, just some sort of evidence to show that you guys are in fact working on it, and at some point in time you will obtain those.
Great. So yeah, take a look at the grant guidelines and the scoring. And every project's going to be different, have different requirements. So if permitting is something that you're likely going to need, and you're further along in the permit process, you may score a little bit more on the project readiness. But no, it is not required at the time of application. It will be required before you start any work on the project. Okay, so the survey is not working. Maybe we could take a look at that. If we can't get it working, then perhaps we can send it out to all of the participants after the event. So I see a hand raised, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute Lillian. Let's see here. All right. Oh, go ahead and give it a try. You should be able to.
Yeah, it
talk.
seems
Okay.
like can you hear me? Okay, great. I was just gonna say that the second link that was sent works. So
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for letting us know. All right, so we will hang out. If you have any other questions, you can also raise your hand if you prefer to answer them. Ask them verbally, but we will hang out for a little bit before signing off. But again, thanks everybody for spending your evening with us. We do appreciate your support and for attending. All right, gonna stick around a couple more minutes, see if anybody has any questions. This recording will be posted on the website. And then we also have another recording of the same presentation as well. And we'll be following up with an email within the next day or two. All right, well, you've been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for your questions. Again, reach out if you need anything. Special thanks to our team here for hanging out and for the excellent presentations. It looks like we did a great job because there are no more questions. So again, feel free to reach out. Don't forget that survey. And I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you, everybody.